Well, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to Last Thursday in Privacy, brought to us by PrivSec and sponsored by OneTrust. This is the first ever of the Last Thursday in Privacy series. We're hoping that this will become a monthly event, and it's aimed at bringing together both the privacy community and the information security, cybersecurity communities. And I think that's particularly relevant in our current situation of this pandemic, where both those communities are working night and day incredibly hard to help obviously develop applications that are going to help us see an exit or return to some type of normal. And it asks some really good ethical questions. But one of the biggest challenges that we've all had is now we're suddenly working from home. For me, it's quite normal. My name's Steve Wright. I'm from Privacy Culture. I was used to working from home and I had an office. So it was a little bit easier for me, but certainly for my clients, I was busy rewriting policies. And what we have here today for you is a fantastic panel that are going to actually go deep into this subject of data protection and cybersecurity and the implications of working from home. So without further ado, to introduce the panel, I'm delighted to welcome Abigail, and she's going to host and lead you through the next 45 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so I'm Abigail Dubinetsky. I'm a data privacy specialist with my in-house lawyer, and I'll be hosting this panel. Just one little bit of housekeeping. This is focusing on issues from really the organization or the employer's perspective. For HR matters, we'll be discussing that in more detail at 4 o'clock. So we haven't forgotten that that's relevant. We just wanted to narrow the scope today. All right, so I have a really fantastic panel with us today. We have Fahim Afghan from Egress, Matthew Gardiner from Mimecast, and Rob Masson from the DPOCentre. And they're going to speak to us, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves and pose to them this challenging question that I'd like them to answer right off the top. So starting, which data protection or cyber implication of remote working would you highlight if you could only highlight one? So imagine you've just got a smidgen of the CFO or the MD's attention. Which one would you bring top of mind? So please introduce yourself first and then give your answer.
It's Matthew Gardiner. I'm a security strategist at a company called Mimecast. And I guess my answer to the question is, if you had digitally transformed, which is sort of shorthand for move to the cloud, this move home for your IT and security controls, not a big deal. Basically, it went very smoothly. However, if you hadn't yet, then you're hearing about a lot of roadblocks, which I won't go into, or not roadblocks, but humps, security and IT humps that organizations have been hitting. And so hopefully we can get into some of those throughout this session.
Thanks. How about you, Fahim?
Thank you, Abigail. Good afternoon, good day to everyone. So Fahim Afghan, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Egress Software Technologies. From our point of view in the conversation we're having, I think we're increasingly hearing about the challenge of the misdirected send. So emails going to the wrong person or with the wrong sensitive content. So in this sort of period of sustained remote working, where we're all working off a mobile device or working late at night, kids running around distracting us, that, I guess, fatigue or distraction is just further elevating the risk of us as employees emailing the wrong person or sending the wrong sensitive information. That's something I would absolutely flag.
Interesting, and definitely one unique to home working. All right, and what about you, Rob?
Well, good afternoon. Yeah, I'm Rob Masson. I'm the CEO of the DPOCentre. We're a provider of outsourced data protection officers that we place into organisations on what we call a fractional basis. That's kind of 1 to 8 days per month. I think the biggest thing for us from a data protection perspective is very much the statement of understand the risks. And I think everything you do and all the steps you take, the starting point should be, what are the risks involved? And so, from a data protection perspective, we have Article 5 of the GDPR that is one of the principles that says, security and integrity of data is paramount, and therefore you need to be taking appropriate technical and organizational measures in order to reduce the risks involved. So I think there's an old adage that basically says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so, from a data protection perspective, we very much advocate, in order to understand the risks, your first step generally is going to be to conduct data protection impact assessments. So, under Article 35, which is the article that kind of dictates what they are, it's for any situation where the type of processing is going to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. So that's the trigger point, if you like, for where a controller needs to be conducting that DPIA in order to slightly to more understand the risks. And it's used to assess the impact of the envisaged processing operation on the protection of personal data. So, and this very much applies to where where you're proposing changing systems. So that's very much related to the fact that we're all now working from home and using different systems in order to do that. In introduction of new technologies. So again, if we're working from home, we're probably, some of us might be using things like VPNs for the first time, video conferencing. We'll all be using, or a lot of us will be using, our personal equipment, and therefore an organisation, the organisations we work for, our controllers, there's a lack of centrally managed security software. There's a reduction in logging and traceability, patch management, incident response management. All these things are being affected by the fact that we're now, kind of working from home. So,
Rob, I'm just going to cut you off there, because I'm worried that because this is all really, really brilliant, and I think the key point there is really this issue of we need to consider the risks associated here. Yep. The DPIA is a really important point. Your introduction, and the reason I'm cutting you off is just I'm conscious that Matthew's going to also be talking about that, and you'll also be talking about the data protection risks. Sure. But just to summarize from your top of mind issues for the three of you, what I heard from Matthew was, look, if this is a mature organization from a digital transformation standpoint, you're all set. You probably only have to worry about the human side that Fahim was mentioning, which was, the other issues like distractions and misdirected emails, and that's unique to these particular circumstances, not exclusive but heightened. And then finally, Rob, that we need to do our risk assessments. Absolutely, this is a material change. It's foundational and fundamental, particularly for teams that are new to remote federated environments. So those are three things to keep you up at night if you're an MD. I'm going to bring it over to Rob again, though, because I want to really highlight some of the points that we sometimes discuss cybersecurity and data protection interchangeably, and especially a lot of CEOs or MDs or financial directors, they really don't understand the difference and tend to lump them together. As a DPO, obviously, you have to have your feet in both sides, and you have to understand both sides. For the purposes of our audience, which is no doubt a diverse one, can you help us understand sort of how they interact, but also distinguish between the implications in the context of remote working of a data protection risk or a cybersecurity risk, and perhaps illustrate with an example of each?
Well, I think I think we need to deal with the there's three phrases that are kind of getting used, and so and they all kind of used a little bit interchangeably, and it varies a bit by geography as well. So we've got cybersecurity, we've got data protection, we've also got privacy. So the confusion is partly down to the way that the US and the EU use the word privacy, or privacy as they would say in the US. For us in the EU, instead of the word privacy, we tend to say data protection. And so from a DPO's perspective, that would be dealing with things like people, policy and process. Whereas the US, data protection is more what we refer to in the EU as cybersecurity, which then would be kind of software and systems and platforms and the IT elements that enable staff within an organisation to perform the function of data protection. So when someone in the EU talks about privacy, they're more than likely describing the basic human right to privacy as per the European Convention on Human Rights, whereas data protection is the function within an organisation that's required to deliver on that basic right. And then from a cybersecurity perspective, this cybersecurity is what I would consider the function that provides, in effect, the tools that are required for the function of data protection in order to deliver the human right. So I don't know if that kind of confuses things or helps, but obviously there's some quite big differences in the way that people interpret those phrases.
I think that's very helpful. And I think also your point about the technological piece, because cybersecurity and info security are not exactly identical either. But I don't want to go off on a tangent there. What I think what I'm hearing from what you said, and I think maybe the easiest way to understand the distinction is a phrase that I hear often is, you can't have privacy without cybersecurity, but cybersecurity alone doesn't guarantee privacy. Exactly. Thanks a lot, Rob. That's great. Matthew, you have literally written the book, an ebook on cybersecurity and remote working. So I suspect you know a little bit about this. Your book has a lot of recommendations in it, but obviously we can't all implement them in 24 hours. So for those employers that aren't as evolved and digitally transformed as we'd like to be, what are some of the biggest challenges they face with this new reality, and what are some effective low friction things they can do right now to mitigate those cybersecurity risks?
Well, I mean, probably one of the biggest challenges is that the cyber criminals have shifted. So they're fully aware of this pandemic and they're leveraging it to the max. Just one data point, there's within 3 weeks of the pandemic sort of becoming a global phenomenon, there were 60,000 plus domains and websites related to COVID and Corona up, many of them malicious, not all, but many of them. So they flip the switch because it becomes a motivation, a way of motivating, their and executing their goals. A second thing you have is, a lot of the systems, IT systems, if you aren't as digitally transformed, you might have had some work from home built into your business model, but then all of a sudden it went from 0 to 100 in one day, and so you would just get systems and processes just got flooded, and in many cases fell down. So VPNs, I think were mentioned earlier. A lot of companies just simply didn't decide them for the whole company to use them. So that's what occurred. In terms of there are some short-term quickie things you can do if you hadn't already done them. The home network now becomes part of your security domain, if you will, from the company point of view. So you can guide your employees pretty quickly about what does it mean to provide better security on your home network. You can do communications. Obviously, that's pretty easy to, increase whatever your security awareness training was. You're probably going to have to both increase it, obviously make it completely remote if you were doing in-person things, and then also turn it towards the work from home pandemic kind of stuff, which would include the home security. And then you can, from an IT and security point of view, you should be doing an assessment of how you're doing, because you've been at it now for a month or two. Probably if you check in with your help desk right now, you'll find out where it's not going well. And maybe there's some things you can do to fix the problems that has already started to come in via your help desk. So those are a few ideas.
Can I ask you on the assessment? It's interesting because no one wants to hear that when they have to turn around a completely new way of doing business, that they have to do any kind of assessment. But you and Rob now have already both said that, and I wholeheartedly agree. Rob talked about the data protection impact assessment, and within that, obviously, we do look at technical and organizational measures, which means we're looking at cybersecurity, absolutely. I'm wondering on the cybersecurity piece specifically, so when we talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, is there a particular type or approach or protocol or resource you would recommend a time-constrained controller look at or use?
Well, I mean, in the security, if you're looking for like a framework, there's the
An easy
SANS top,
one.
SANS top 20 is probably
Okay.
one. So they're like, they're 20 controls. Obviously there's only 20, so you can quickly rip through them and go, how are we doing against them? So that's probably
Great.
a quick one that I would recommend.
Excellent. Thank you. And someone has asked what the full title of your ebook is.
Well, I mean, I can promote it. It's in
Yeah,
there. It's called
Okay,
Improving Cybersecurity for Remote Working, 13 Recommendations, and it's on the Mimecast website.
Okay.
I'll drop a link into the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. Do that, please. All right. So that's I think also another really important point there that I think we have to think about as employers, as companies, is, you know, the bad guys just have to get it right one time. We have to get it right all the time. So they can password spray, they can take advantage, they can send phishing attacks, and these are sort of crimes of opportunity, really. So I think maybe, Matthew, there's an advantage in thinking like a bad guy once in a while when you're thinking about how to cyber-proof your new environment. Fahim, on that point, I've kind of slid into your area or your favorite topic, but really remote working has put the lion's share of responsibility on what I like to call the weakest link and what you like to call the insider threat, affectionately, which is the employer. Can you talk a bit about this sort of insider threat and how do we manage it when it's now moved completely outside our control or almost completely and outside our perimeter?
Absolutely. I think perimeter is a great choice of word there, Abigail. I think so. A bit of context. So I think it was back end of 2019 last year that we personally submitted a freedom of information request to the ICO here in the UK. And what they told us was that of all the breaches reported to them up until that point last year, almost 2/3 of those were down to human error. And that's just the ones that were reported to them, right? I'm sure there are some out there that remain unreported. So the insider threat or risk is this sense that people are the new perimeter and are becoming the dominant force behind many of the sort of security breaches or incidents that we see today. Because I think of course, what we're talking about now, the way in which we work has changed so dramatically for many of us. You know, working almost non-stop off a mobile device, working late into the night. You know, for the parents in the audience, I know how you feel. I've locked the door so my crazy 2-year-old doesn't run in and interrupt us. But all of that put together is really just dialing up the risk of a data leak, and not just what I mentioned before in terms of emailing the wrong recipient or sending the wrong sensitive attachment or content. Also potentially not applying the appropriate level of encryption or protection to sensitive content, or even as you guys, you know, with Matthew just there alluding to the sort of the criminal aspect, responding to what looks like a genuine and authentic email, but actually is a very now sophisticated phishing attack. So from our point of view, a lot of breaches now are happening not necessarily because of malicious agents, but actually these human activated threats from inside the walls of the business that are putting sensitive data most at risk. So I guess that's what we mean by the insider threat or insider risk. In terms of how to manage it, I think from my point of view personally, I think technology has to step up to the plate a bit more and play its part. So I think traditionally technology sat on the sort of the edge, the network edge, as it were. But I think there's a real opportunity now with advances in ML, AI, etc., and becoming more predictive in terms of insights, for it to better engage with the user at the user and the employee's level. So because number one, it can, you know, we can build context around the user, because obviously, you know, the way you email Abigail is different to how maybe Matthew or Rob or myself, our email habits and who we send to, what time we send, etc. And we can then drive awareness through that. But I think the technology can also assess the risk at the point of send and eliminate it if necessary as well. So I guess what I'm saying is taking away and probably the stress of relying on employees to do the right thing, and sort of wrapping the technology around them to make better decisions, more secure business outcomes as well.
I think that's really that's a really important point about the stress and how we're more prone to error. And I think technology, there have been some technological solutions, like you mentioned, like AI and ML, so artificial intelligence and machine learning, that study your patterns. And also they're very good at they can be very good at catching those very elaborate spear phishing attacks, the ones where someone studied your habits, studied internal decision making, and then crafted something that looks like it's coming from your CEO or your CFO, asking you, somebody very junior in the hierarchy, to give up all kinds of information. We see this a lot. A lot of SMEs are getting targeted with invoice fraud. So there's this, they're being told, and if you're on a small device, the nature of that device is you can't see things as well. You might be scrolling and you may even accidentally touch something, a link, and that opens something up. So you're right, this, with the stress on top of that, the distraction of the 2-year-old or 13-year-old in my case, can certainly lead to those issues. I've seen some things like almost like putting speed bumps into the process, which is counterintuitive, because with technology, we're trying to make everything faster. And because this has been a significant interruption in business for a lot of people, we have every desire, we've got this need for speed. But companies really could protect themselves, it seems, by putting up a few speed bumps. I think Microsoft has is it Microsoft or Google has, they have like a 5-minute undo period or something like that, or some delays.
Yeah, Google have that. Yep.
Undo. Yeah, so you know, and also we're starting to see in Outlook these messages. This is an outside sender, or this is an unfamiliar sender, and these kinds of things. So, as much as possible, if we can enable them, those would probably really help. But that human error, that people power, Rob, also ties into data protection as well, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is a piece of the puzzle, but data protection goes beyond. So, you know, we're talking about making sure you're using for the right purposes. You've got a lawful basis and you're respecting that. You know, you're minimizing how much personal data you're using, and so on, all of the principles. So, Rob, when it comes to data protection risks in a remote working context where people may be using their personal devices, for example?
So I think, you know, from our perspective, you know, a lot of responsibility does rest on the shoulders of employees. So, you know, we can provide them with fantastic tools, you know, to help stop making them, you know, silly mistakes and things like that. But, you know, generally speaking, it's the human element that you know, is really the cause of most of the problems. So, so employers need to kind of, you know, they very much need to concentrate on the people issues. And ensure that everybody, all employees in the organisation, play their part in enabling that organisation to comply with the principles of GDPR that you just kind of mentioned. So, so the starting point really is around, it's kind of policies and training. So, but it's also kind of monitoring compliance and record keeping, because the accountability principle is also fundamental to supporting the organisation. So, I mean, from our perspective, the first step would certainly be to review all of your employee policies, certainly the ones that are relevant to working from home. So things like a bring your own device policy for those people that are using their own equipment, you know, at home. It's working remotely policy, internet and social media usage, breach reporting, identifying individuals' rights requests, all of these kind of policies. And it's so important that the organisation sets out to employees their expectations on them when it comes to kind of complying with those, because you don't want a situation where, you know, an employee kind of turns around and goes, well, I didn't know, you know, no one told me, you know, what was I supposed to do, kind of thing. And therefore, you know, that really is kind of the starting point. Set out what the organisation expects, you know, for them. And then, you know, if you can do, send out kind of bite-sized emails, awareness updates, you know, kind of on the expectations on those employees according to those policies, and if you can make them kind of specific to job roles, you know, then that's even better. So, but you know, there's no shortage of training materials online. large organizations, LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, Coursera, all those kind of organizations have got either low cost or at the moment kind of 30-day free trial, access to their data protection training. So there's kind of no excuse that organizations can say, well, we weren't able to train our staff in data protection because they weren't here or whatever, because these things do exist. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is to avoid the more relaxed practices becoming business as usual, and therefore kind of sufficient formality is retained, even though kind of working from home in a more informal kind of environment. So alongside the policies and the training, record keeping is vital. So conduct those DPIAs. Remote working slightly means that kind of your processing activities has changed. So this comes back to your kind of your records of processing activities, as well as your information asset register, because things will have moved around potentially, and new risks have introduced. So update your risk register too. But it all adds up to demonstrating accountability. So that if it's found that you've had a problem or you have a problem in the future, then you're mitigating some of the potential risk later down the line.
Thank you. There's a related question, and I'm wondering, this is open to anyone, but maybe Rob, it's one that you deal with a lot, but how do you advise the controller when they're presented with a lack of employee buy-in into any kind of compliance program, whether it's complying with security, security, or complying with data protection requirements? Maybe just to give, I'll just give Fahim a chance to start there.
Sorry, you cut out there, Abigail. Apologies.
How do you address lack of employee buy-in when it comes to things like compliance? So in your case, it'd be compliance with security policies, but in Rob's case, I'd be thinking about data protection as well.
Yeah. So I think from our point of view, securing buy-in is a huge pain point we hear from. We talk to a lot of IT leaders who come to us talking about the need for ease of use. And if we can make solutions or tools that effectively protect data as seamless as possible, as easy to use, and going back to that point about technology, again, making people who in that sort of part of the chain stepping up to the plate, so to speak, and sort of provide something that makes it as easy to use as possible for the user, then I think we from our experience, we've sort of got over a lot of the hurdle of that lack of buy-in. Sorry.
I'll just throw in that in security, there's always been a conversation of carrot and stick. What's the best approach to get behavior that you want? And I think it's coming out very strongly that it's carrot, that you want to create an environment that's inviting for people to be part of. You might have a little competition between functions, like who's doing better than, but it's always on the positive. This whole idea, like 3 strikes you're out, that is just such a negative. And security really should be the team sport. So if you want your team to perform, you don't denigrate your weak player. You build them up, you train them up, you make them part of the team, and you're only as strong as the weakest element of your team. So you use positive reinforcement, not negative.
I think that's really helpful.
After making it easy, of course.
Yeah. So you've raised 2 points, which I think are absolutely critical, and building on from what Fahim was saying as well, is that there is an important bit of empathy we need to extend, because this is a huge change for everyone. But the other piece is also that now more than ever, for employees who are working exclusively from home, when before they were on premises, and especially on their own devices, or at least using their own home networks, our fates are tied together in a much more pronounced way than they ever were. When you work for a company and the company's systems are attacked, but your data is all safely tucked away on your own device, and that's not impacted, of course there are impacts to you as an employee because it reflects on you, it can have downstream effects. But now it can literally mean ransomware on your own device, or your own network being attacked, or something else happening, or your own personal data leaking because you accidentally left your computer unlocked and your 2-year-old decided to hit send, and personal information of your own that you were typing ends up getting sent to all your colleagues, and who knows. So I think you're right. I think that the frictionless piece, technology wherever you can to make it as simple as possible, but also keeping that open dialogue is really helpful. People need to know who to contact if they're not sure. On the training resources, some people have asked about that, and Rob, I think you mentioned a few, and I'll just add two more. The National Cybersecurity Centre for the UK has a fantastic training program that they've got. It's only about 20 minutes or so. It's interactive with questions. You can even download it to your own LMS so you can capture the results by your employees. It covers phishing and a number of other things. And the ICO also has some free training as well. There's another question as well that's come in. Is there a specific risk management framework that focuses on remote working? So in the way that we've got NIST frameworks or ISO 27001, is there anything specifically on remote working?
I mean, I don't know if I can link this one to the previous question as well. I mean, you know, for us, it's all about the culture. So, you know, if your organization, its management team and all of its structures right down to the data facing staff buy into the concept of data protection, then you know, almost inherently that organization will start to be able to comply and demonstrate accountability much better. So in terms of whoever the questioner was, I would say if you're having trouble, if you're the DPO or the person responsible for data protection, and you're trying to push upstream, you know, you're swimming upstream trying to, you know, kind of get people to comply, I would strongly suggest that you try and get a sponsor on the board, get somebody very senior who will support driving the data protection agenda through the organization, and create, if you're the size of organization that warrants it, create a governance committee and structure, you know, so that you are starting to get supporters in your organization across the various departments within that organization. So that it's not just one person push. You know, it is sponsor to governance committee to information asset owners to department heads to data facing staff. Everybody at all those levels, somebody in there is supporting the implementation of data protection throughout that organization.
And as one comment on the framework, I'm not aware of a framework for remote working. I don't think one's needed, to be honest. When you're digitally transformed, you're location independent. It doesn't matter where you are. The systems and controls apply exactly the same. And in fact, if you operate that way, you know, when there's not an emergency, the emergency itself becomes a non-issue from an IT and security point of view. It does become an issue for other reasons, but so yeah, no, I would say the frameworks that we all use still apply. It's just the location of the people has just distributed.
So on that note, is there a digital transformation framework that you would, I know that's such a lofty term and it's not really well defined, but.
Yes, it's one word, the cloud. Use the cloud. If you use the cloud for IT and security, you literally have no technical issue. It's,
yeah,
I mean,
there are cloud
scalability, mobility, all the availability stuff has proven true. I think we knew it was true, but now it's really proven true. I was imagining this happened 15 years ago. You know, we'd be in a whole lot of trouble. I mean, at least for the industries where we don't screw things together in the office, you know, we would be in a bad way. Now it's just more or less business as usual, you know, with some hiccups here and there, but more or less we're operating like we just did when we were in the office.
I'm glad you mentioned the cloud, and I would agree with you that really looking at software as a service, cloud security is the way to go. And if, again, the National Cybersecurity, so NCSC website has fantastic, they've even got product evaluations. They've got, if you want something that's kind of gives you a standard checklist you can go through on your cloud security, and specifically when you're evaluating software as a service products, which all of us are heavily reliant on right now, it's a great place to start. They've even done half of the work for you on some very popular products. So like Slack, for example, or Basecamp and things like that. So definitely check out that site. There are lots more. But that ties into to another question, which is that now, a lot of employers are scrambling for new software as a service products. They are trying to get products and platforms that they can maintain business continuity with, that have the functionality, the in-person feel, and they don't have the luxury of time that we ordinarily would to shop around, compare, or evaluate products on their data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity credentials. That said, they do still need to secure their data, especially now more than ever that they are making wonderful targets. And they also need to meet their due diligence obligations from a data protection perspective. So this raises a lot of questions, even in a pandemic. Can you provide some tips on how employers can quickly and effectively vet the tools that they're thinking of using for data protection and cybersecurity compliance while maintaining business continuity? And I think let's just start with Fahim, and then we'll go to Rob and then Matthew. So how can you quickly, is there a quick flags issue or flags approach that you can take?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple I would probably offer. Number one, look, you mentioned sort of certifications, accreditations, and standards earlier. Right on the wrapper of the tool or whatever it is you're evaluating, look for certifications, look for accreditation. So ISO 27001, SOC 2, commercial product assurance, CPA, other government accreditations as well, because that's a great marker for security credentials of the company. You can probably feel that you can trust them with the secure, with the information flows that you're sharing and hoping to secure through whatever tool. And I think it sounds a bit Bio 101 class, but I think get a sense of, if you can quickly, get a sense of who else uses it, who else is associated with this. The reason I flagged that was just before lockdown, I was actually having a conversation with a group security director who mentioned a couple of solutions they're using simply because they know they're used by certain government agencies handling probably some of the most classified data on the planet, right? So keep that in mind. That it sounds quite simplistic, but let's not forget the sort of simple lessons that we learned maybe many years ago and keep them in mind. But yeah, that'd be a couple of tips off my head.
Yeah, I guess it can at least help to narrow the field so you don't waste a lot of time on something that looks great, and then at least, yeah, you can zero in. That's extremely helpful. Rob, any other quick fixes? And I know it's not a one and done, but at least just to narrow the field, make it a bit easier.
I'm not sure I can give you a quick fix for it, but obviously we're all jumping on tools like Zoom, which we're obviously using right now. We're not really understanding the privacy, cybersecurity, or the data protection risks that are associated with them. But at the same time, I'd always advocate that you take a risk-based approach. 0% risk and 100% compliance is rarely commercially viable or even possible, even without a pandemic. So everything that you introduce is going to have some kind of risk-based element to it, and therefore, if you're choosing a particular tool, your DPIA is your first step into evaluating whether that tool is something that is suitable and appropriate for the type of processing that you're conducting, the method by which you're doing it, and the people for which you are processing it on.
Rob, I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And the reason I say that is because the fact is at some point you're going to have to, well, ideally, normally before you start processing, you're supposed to do the DPIA. And so if you're thinking of onboarding a new technology, talk to their DPO. If they don't have one, that's maybe a flag right there. If they do have one, but they don't have an answer for you when you say, what have you done? Have you done a DPIA, or have you considered, data protection risks? Have you built in controls? Again, I would run away if they don't know what you're talking about, or if they have a pat answer like, oh, well, the GDPR doesn't apply to me, because it's not just an EU thing. It's a global issue, privacy risk assessments, data protection assessments. Matthew, anything to add to that?
Not really. I would just, the quick and dirty is like Fahim said. This is not a new industry. We've been doing this kind of stuff for 10 plus years. So your peer, if you haven't done it, your peers have, and we've been put through the ringer for years on security and controls and data privacy. So there's some comfort there. There's certifications. The ISOs are a great one, SOC 2. So, you know, you can pretty much quickly crank through it by checking those basics, checking with your peers at companies like yourself. And then, you know, if it's an emergency, you know, you just go with it. And then if there's adjustments or configurations you need to make after the fact, do it. But, you know, by the definition of an emergency, you can't dwell too long on the decisioning.
Can I just add a point on the you know, the usage of the cloud thing? I don't disagree with Matthew at all in terms of, you know, utilizing cloud solutions. You know, it reduces hugely the requirement and the impact on an organization in terms of technical knowledge and skill. But even with cloud services, it is still very much a shared responsibility model. You know, the cloud provider is responsible for the platform and securing, you know, access to that platform. You are still responsible for the data that's in it, and, you know, the software that you might be running in it, if it's an AWS bucket or something, you know, just whatever you're doing with it, that is still your responsibility. You are not completely divesting yourself of responsibility from it. And, you know, so you still need to understand it. You still need to know where the risks are. You still need to know how to manage it. You know, but you just don't need to worry about the fact that some excellent techie somewhere around the world is taking care of making sure the platform is safe.
Thank you. That's great. Maybe it's not fair to do this, but do any of you have any favorite tools you'd like to recommend, or at least maybe a way to, I guess we've already sort of answered the second question, but if there is something that you like.
I've got a favorite suggestion.
Okay.
So unplug the internet.
No, I don't go with that one.
I mean, we put out 19 kind of tips over the last few weeks in terms of you know, kind of basic steps and tools that people working from home can kind of take. And you know, and I'll give you a few of them. I mean, the main one is still the policies. You know, so they're there for good reason. They're intended to reduce the risks for you as well as the organization, and also to protect the privacy of the data subjects you process data on. So, you know, get the policies right. That's definitely much step one. A couple of practicality things. You know, lock your screen when you walk away from it. It's dead easy. If it's a PC, it's just Windows L. You know, get into the habit. Every time you stand up, walk away, you know, press Windows L, job done. If you're processing paper records at home, especially if they contain sensitive information, if you're doing the payroll or something, you know, buy yourself or get the company to buy you a cross-cut shredder. It's the standard you want is a DIN level 3. They're like 35 quid, something like that off of Amazon. You know, they're not expensive. Likewise, if you're storing paper records, again, if they're sensitive special category data, make sure it goes into a locked filing cabinet or a lockable kind of storage box. Use a LastPass, you know, something like that. I think, you know, in terms of tools for storing passwords, others exist, but they're all kind of, you know, password managers are all out there to help you to use different passwords on every system you log into, and you don't have to necessarily remember them all. Two last quick ones. If you're having, so data protection is about digital, it's about paper, but it's also about voice. So if you're having conversations, especially if they're involving other employees or health issues or anything like that, turn off Alexa, okay?
Oh, absolutely.
And Alexa is recording everything you say, simple as that, okay? So let's leave that one there. But probably the most important thing, and it's the issue that creates the most data protection risk for yourself and for the organization, is please remember that when you use an online service, a game or an app or a platform, and if you sign up for free, what you've got to understand is that you are the product being sold, okay? Your personal data is what is of value to that organization when you sign up for that free service. So, you know, really do think hard about whether that's something that you really want to be installing.
Excellent, thank you. The point on the password manager, that's one of the points I would want to bring to an MD's or anyone's attention right away. Is password management is, you know, on the one hand, you need to have strong passwords, when they're too complex and they're single use, which is what they should be, it becomes very difficult to manage. So a password manager that's secure in and of itself is really helpful. Even better is this move towards zero sign-on. So we've got single sign-on solutions that you can get that will help your employees use a single sign-on. One-time password is another option, but there's even zero sign-on, which is even more beautiful. There are tons of products out there with free 30-day, 60-day, 90-day trials as well. On the My In-House Lawyer website, there's a COVID-19 page. It's got a bunch of things, and the section on data protection and cybersecurity, I've linked to a few things there. All right, so we are running short of time. Someone has asked, bring your own device, the savior or the devil. I know, Matthew, you have opinions on this.
No, so one of my, I forget which number of my recommendation it is, but no to bring your own device. There, you notice actually there's been a burst of laptop purchases in the market, like Intel and Dell, and saw their business spike. That's a sign that people weren't fully grasping that BYOD was not the right choice, and now they are. It's very hard to secure. It's the complexity and the privacy implications of securing a device you don't own is not worth overcoming to save a few $100. So issue the laptops or use mobile device management for mobile devices. That's a reasonable compromise. But letting someone, I mean, just think about the privacy implications. If it's technically possible to secure the web browsing of a non-company owned device, but that means we have to monitor all your web browsing. Do you want us to do that?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw a little caveat in there, though. There are some tools that have made it a point to build the employee privacy questions into that by, building an anonymous web filtering where it's not really truly anonymous, but there are a number of techniques that you can use to monitor risks rather than monitor employees and then address as necessary. For those companies that are sort of been thrown into this or who just don't have the budgets, or even procurement is slowed because we're in really unusual times, a mobile device management solution and a mobile security solution as well might be the easiest. And again, there's some fantastic products out there. Anyone who follows me on LinkedIn has seen me posting about a few of them. That are, a lot of them have 30-day, 60-day, 90-day trials, and they do talk about employee privacy, and they do have DPOs. So it is worth exploring those because we can't configure each one of our employees' devices right now, or trust them to have the expertise.
I wouldn't. That's not the plan, though. The plan should be to issue the device in an emergency. I guess you do what you got to do, but a lot of the objections you hear is, well, the CFO won't approve the $300. What? That's like penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah, and I think it's about flipping the conversation away from cost to investment.
I think there's you mentioned CFOs there. I don't know if anybody saw the Gartner research that came out a couple of days ago. They did a survey 1 or 2 weeks ago on chief financial officers. And they were rather worryingly, 42% of CFOs have got no financial contingency plan for there being any kind of second wave to COVID-19. My suggestion would be if you're a data protection officer, don't let that be you. I think there's a tendency to think that it's okay to let data protection take a bit more of a backseat in the current times. But to a degree, now is the perfect time to be investing the resources into driving the data protection agenda forward. And if you do, it will be another reason why your organization comes out the other end of this in a better position than maybe some of your competitors.
Thank you very much. I see Steve is showing his face. Where are the devil horns to tell me put on your anonymous cap? Okay, we have to wrap up, I guess, then, right? Can I just get us to conclude just some concluding remarks, or is that too much? Okay, so really short concluding remarks, everyone, okay? To wrap up, can we end on a positive, hopeful note? So we started with a call to angst at the beginning, which was your top of mind considerations. Can we get a call to action, just one practical thing that an employer can do right now to reduce their cybersecurity and data protection risks with remote working? Let's start with Rob. One thing.
I mean, understand the risks every time.
Great. Excellent. Matthew.
Just think location independent all the time, and that leads you to the cloud.
Perimeter is everywhere. Great. Fahim.
I think help your employees become your biggest asset, not your liability. Help them through whether that's training or technology or what other solutions. Help them in this current environment.
Help them help you. Brilliant. I think just those 3 things alone would have been enough to get us going. All right, thank you very much. We had a few other questions we weren't able to get to, so I apologize for that. Some people have asked for the link again to the website I mentioned. I'll type it into the chat and then you'll have it, or you can also, I post on these things on LinkedIn a lot, so if you want, I'll be posting some of them there. Thank you very much, and over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Abigail, and thank you, panelists, because that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. And I was scribbling lots of notes, not including looking up your book, Matthew. So thank you for that. Really, really good, lively debate. And as you could see, Abigail, the questions coming through are thick and fast. It's really hard to sort of, juggle those two. You did amazingly well. So. Thank you very much. Just to remind everybody, the next subject is at 3 o'clock. That's on data governance and privacy best practice. And that, again, is a panel. I'm looking forward to that. I'm actually on that panel as well, which is nice. But I just thank you once again for tuning in. This is last Thursday in Privacy, brought to you by PrivSec and sponsored by OneTrust. So thank you very much for tuning in. If you could tune in at 3 o'clock, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Great, thank you.